Hey guys, we're at Propel Bikes in Brooklyn, New York. This is a cool place to explore because they carry a whole bunch of different bike types, and I thought it would be fun to hang out with Chris Nolte, the owner, and talk about those different wheel sizes, tire widths, even tubes versus tubeless. And the reason is, for me, I've been riding a bike kind of my whole life, and I started out with like a kid's bike, and it had these smaller, like 20-inch wheels. It brings the whole bike down closer to the ground because you can see there the axle, it's halfway in between. There's the radius of the wheel, the diameter is the full width, so the radius is shorter, and then you come up to something like this. It raises the bike and it gives you more clearance for mountain biking and stuff. But sometimes when you're thinking about a folding bike or a compact bike, there's all these different aspects, and there's a reason behind tire sizes. There's also different tire styles. But maybe before we jump in and hand it over to Chris, I'll just say a couple things from my experience. In recent years, especially with electric bikes, we've been seeing more and more like plus size, extra wide tires because it gives you some stability. It also gives you some comfort because there's more air volume in there, and that air acts as like a cushion, but they weigh a little bit more. And again, on an electric bike, maybe it's not such a big deal because you've got a motor, you got some help, some assistance. So comfort comes into play when you're going a little bit faster on average, maybe if you're going a little bit further. And we're starting to see more electric bikes that have suspension. This is an electric mountain bike, but over here we've got a Reese & Miller Delight, and it's got 2 batteries. It's more of a road bike, but it still has that suspension. So in working in combination with the wheels and the tire size, there's so many aspects to this. Chris, what do you think? Where should we start?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess wheel size probably could be a good place to start. As you said, kind of some wheels, you might have a smaller wheel or you might have a larger one, and there's different implications with that. I mean,
let's talk about that. So the smallest wheel size that I see tends to be 20 inches.
For the most part, yeah, with the exception of maybe like a Brompton where it might be like a 16-inch wheel, but for the most part it's 20-inch wheel.
That's like those over there.
Something like this. So on a cargo bike, the 20-inch wheel, they use that to bring the center of gravity much lower, so you can bring the weight lower, which gives you more balance. So you'll see that on these front loaders.
And easier to load too, so you don't have to lift as high to get the kids or your box in the front of the bike.
That's right.
But then why do they have a big rear wheel?
Yeah, so a larger wheel, it's easier to maintain speed, as you're pedaling and that sort of thing. Once you have, when you have a small wheel, you have to pedal really fast to kind of keep that going.
So it's like gearing simplicity. Like a lot of the cassettes and the internally geared hubs and stuff, they're designed for the bigger wheels, so they can use stock parts without having a larger chain ring.
Generally speaking, yeah, that's one thing, and then handling is a little bit different and that sort of thing as well.
And maybe smoothness.
Right.
So another aspect of this is you see how where the wheel touches the ground, it's kind of steep going up and back because, again, that diameter is smaller. So this has a high attack angle, which means it kind of runs into things, right? Versus these bigger tires over here, this has a lower attack angle, and it can roll over things a little bit more smoothly, and it gives you a better surface area. So maybe traction is an aspect too. Do you think I got that right?
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay, so the next biggest size that's pretty standard, we don't see it here, but it's 24 inches, and I feel like that's on a lot of kids' bikes and stuff.
Yeah, kids' bikes. There's a couple of cargo bikes that we'll see that on, like the Benno Boost. We saw it on the Felt Brew Hall. Turn does some folding bikes with the 24-inch wheel as well. But
speaking of Turn, this is their Vectron. It's got the really popular, a bit more expensive, fancy Bosch drive system. They put all the weight towards the center, and then on these wheels, they're using 20 inches because when you fold it, the bike tends to be more compact. But check this out. I mean, these are the Schwabe Big Apple. We're in New York, so I think they might have named it after the city.
I think so, yeah. So they had the Fat Frank, they had the Big Apple, Big Ben. There's all these different.
Oh, so Big Ben, that's like in London,
yeah.
Right? So the neat thing about these tires is they've got reflective sidewall stripes for safety. They've got some performance line race guards, so there's some lining inside to maybe reduce the potential for flats. They're 20 by 2.15. So 20 is that diameter, 2.15 is like that width here. If we jump over to the Vectron, or wait, that was the Vectron. If we jump over to the GSD, the Get Stuff Done bike, it's more of a cargo bike. It doesn't fold, but they still wanted to keep it relatively compact. They wanted a long wheelbase, which means from the axle to the axle for stability, but they also wanted to keep it low and they wanted to keep it short. So they did that by having the same 20-inch tires, but they were like, well, you know, they're carrying a lot of extra weight and you want to have comfort. What can we do about that? So they got these custom Schwabe Supermoto X tires, and instead of 2.125, it's like 2.4. So they're just super thick. You see that? It's really big. It's much more of that balloon look. Yeah, that's kind of neat to see. Just a subtle difference in the tire width can actually change the handling. It makes it more stable. It gives you that comfort.
Absolutely, yeah, and it protects the rim as well. You know, it gives you a little bit more puncture protection sometimes. You know, depending on the thickness of the tire.
When I've heard about it, so there's this thing called like snake bite, where you know if you're coming at a sharp curb like this and you hit it really really hard, the tire's gonna morph out of the way and squish down. But when it does that, it can actually pinch the inner tube between the rim and the tire wall, and it creates two little holes, and that's a snake bite, just like the fangs of a snake.
That's right, yep.
Okay, great. So we've gone over 20-inch, 24-inch. What's the next, 26?
Yeah, 26 would probably be the more common size from there. Although it's more rapidly being replaced by 27.5, but we do, I'm trying to see if we have actually some 26-inch wheeled bikes. I think there's 26-inch on the back of these two bikes. So these are both 26-inch wheels.
Huh.
All these have 27.5, 27.5, 28-inch. Although 28-inch can be referred to in many different ways. 28, 700C, or even 29 are more commonly for mountain bikes. But really it's the same effective rim diameter, or often referred to as like the ETRO.
Okay.
So there's different sizes, which you'll see for wheels. For instance, a 700C, a 29 or 28-inch is 622 millimeters.
Huh.
And then, for example, a 650B is 584. 26 is 559. And then you have the 24, 20-inch, and there's, you know, so there's different ways of referring to it.
So that's a really interesting point, Chris. What we're looking at over there, that's the 700C, and a lot of times you see that on kind of a road bike. That's how they refer to it, aka 28 inches,
right,
just like we were talking about. But this one has really skinny tires. Okay, this is more of a city bike. It's going to be very efficient, lighter weight, and just, you know, maybe kind of nimble too with those tires. Even though the diameter of the wheel is large, the narrower tires can make it a little, I don't know, give you what would that do? It gives you a little bit more nimble feel?
A little bit, yeah. And then I guess one of the main advantages of a narrower tire generally is a little bit less road resistance.
Yeah.
So with the wider tire, you have more contact with the road. Maybe there's a little bit more resistance. You have more traction and more comfort,
yeah,
but there's always trade-offs.
Well, these tires tend to run at really high PSI or pressure. And in Europe, in some places, they call it bar. And
right,
we were talking about that. So like 1 bar is 1 atmosphere. Right. So we're at sea level right now. It's like 1 bar. Well, you don't want your tires need to be like higher pressure than that. So a lot of times it's 2 to 4 bar or whatever. And a common, like, maybe one of these tires would be like 35 to 65 psi, whereas that might be like 80 psi. So high pressure, not as much air volume, and I tend to need to pump those up pretty regularly, make sure you're at high pressure, because there's not as much air in it. It can just kind of leak out quickly.
That's right. And one of the interesting things, you know, talking about air pressure, as this is, you know, really high volume, really high pressure.
Yeah.
Whereas a tire like the GSD or a mountain bike tire, it's higher volume, so you don't need as high a pressure. So there's kind of 2 different ways of doing it. It's either high pressure, low volume, or high volume, low pressure. And so that's what you'll generally find with the higher volume tire, the pressure required is less.
That's interesting, because it seems like it's still just a rubber wall. Why is it okay to have lower pressure?
So I've been thinking about this and talking to some different people about it. I mean, really, it's because it's pounds per square inch, so it's how many pounds. I guess when you have more square inches, it requires less, less.
Okay, because these can still feel pretty firm, right? Like, I mean, this one, it's rated, let's see, a lot of times on the tire wall is where you can find that, the info. So 30 to 65 PSI. That's what I was saying earlier. It's printed on the sidewall. One of the things I do in all my reviews is try to list that, because over time, as your tires get dirty or you get scraped across the edge of a curb, you can lose that information.
Right.
And then coming back to the point, earlier I was talking about the 700C 28-inch. Well, here, this isn't a 29er. Let's pretend it is. This is 27.5. 29er would be a little bit bigger. And the interesting thing is you've got this tire that's built on it. So it can end up being, even though this is a 27.5, the effective diameter, like what touches the street, can actually be pretty close to the 28 or 700C. So it's not just the rim. It's
That's
also
right.
the tire.
Yeah, and also depending on the pressure that you use, because one of the things we were talking about before is road resistance. If you have a higher pressure, the contact patch on the road is actually going to be less. Where the lower pressure ends up flattening out a little bit. You get more contact on the road, a little bit more comfortable, but you're less efficient because there's more drag.
And then there's also, is it a narrow contact patch or is it wider? And we were looking at that rim again. I think it's, I'm not holding it, but it's a narrow rim. And then on a lot of these mountain bikes or even some of the bigger, fatter road tires, the rim gets a little wider. So that spreads the tire out a little bit too. It can handle those bigger tires.
Right, and that's really important also because, just because you can fit a wider tire on the rim doesn't necessarily mean that's a good idea. One of the concerns is sometimes you can kind of get this like ballooning effect.
Yeah.
Really, you want, in an ideal world, the rim and the tire kind of make this full circle, and that helps with cornering as you're kind of turning into a corner. As you go onto the side of the tire, if the tire is kind of one complete circle, it really makes it a lot smoother and it's a better grip.
But the rims also add weight, so it's interesting to see how the rim's about that wide here, and then on this bike it's a little bit wider, and some of these rims have like no eyelets, like this one, that the spoke just has that nipple right there, versus, I don't know, we're looking for like a heavy duty. We have any rims? There we go, right over here. So this one, that has reinforcement eyelets, so it just helps to spread the weight out and maybe make it easier to adjust. It tends to be like a fancier thing. Maybe I'm getting off topic a little bit on wheels and tires, but there's a lot out there, and hopefully I don't know if we're making it that much clearer, but we're describing some of the reasons behind these different tire widths and sizes.
Sure.
Yeah. So from here, maybe we can talk about flat tires and stuff, because regardless of the size of your wheel and tire, when you're riding around a lot, especially with a heavier electric bike, usually they're 50 pounds, and maybe you've even got cargo on your bike. This one's rated up to like 400 pounds. That's a lot of force on the bottom of your tire, and if you run over a nail or even in some cases just one of those goat head little thorns, you can get a flat.
Absolutely.
And it's not a lot of fun to lift your bike and deal with it. Some of these don't have quick release, so what are some ways that people can avoid flats? Like I've heard, keep your tire pressure relatively constant, like make sure it's between those two recommended.
Right, and as you mentioned, you might have to check that once a week, or some, with the really high pressure road tire, maybe even once a day if you're riding a lot.
Yeah.
But a good place to start is with the tire, actually, because some tires, specifically, tires that are made for non-electric bikes, it's quite often that they're going to make them to be very lightweight. And when they make them to be lightweight, they're generally compromising some of the safety or puncture protection.
Okay.
So this is actually kind of a cross section of a bunch of different Schwabe tires, and this can kind of give you an idea of some of the different tires that are out there. And to start with something like this, which might be a little bit more performance oriented, it's going to be a lightweight tire, but it doesn't really offer all that much puncture protection because you just have this, couple millimeters of rubber. But then if you contrast it with something like this right next to it, which is a Marathon Plus, which is widely regarded in the industry as one of the flatless tires because it has all this extra high density rubber, which really adds to the puncture protection. So if you put if you get any sort of glass or thorns or anything like that in the tire, it's not going to actually penetrate into the tube. And so that's one way that you can really address the concerns of getting flats.
So is the blue the high density stuff?
The blue is kind of the highest puncture protection, highest level of puncture protetion. And there's different levels. The green guard, as you mentioned before, that's kind of the middle variety. So if you look at this here, this is not quite as thick as these blue ones here, and actually the rubber density is a little bit different as well. So
the trade-off's weight, or is this just marketing? It's like you can get blue for a little more or green for a little less. They weigh the same, or
the weight would generally be a little bit higher on the plus tire.
Because density means like how tightly packed material is.
That's right.
Okay, so like styrofoam, it's like not very dense and it's lightweight.
Right.
You know, certain metals or whatever are very, very dense and very heavy. So it's still rubber. It's going to be somewhat flexible. But you get that thickness.
Right. And there are sometimes trade-offs. You know, some of the tires, if they do have that extra puncture protection, a lot of times you might lose that softness of the tire, which gives you that comfort and some of the ability to kind of get into the road and grip really well. So that's something to consider. But now we're starting to see, this is in Schwabe tires, which are often used for e-bikes because they have tires that are specifically rated for e-bikes. That's the other thing that in Europe it's a requirement. In the US we're not really that far along with the regulations and that sort of thing, but in Europe there's a lot of requirements specifically that the tire to be rated for an e-bike. Like this tire, for example, in Europe is rated for 25 kilometer per hour e-bike, which is 15 miles an hour. Now they don't at the moment have a specific rating for 20 mile an hour e-bikes. However, they do have ratings for 28 mile an hour or 45 kilometers per hour e-bikes. And that's a lot of times why you'll see some of the same tires featured on a lot of different bikes, because they specifically have that rating and the manufacturers need to be in compliance.
I see.
Especially in Europe.
With a lot of the bikes that are in Chris's shop here, they're from Europe. So it's like Reese and Mueller over here, and we've got some Mustache bikes. Tern, I believe that's like maybe a U.S. brand, but they've got a base in Taiwan and they sell globally.
That's right, yeah.
So the point being, it's kind of the trickle-down thing where there's a bigger market over there, they have to be in compliance, and so we end up getting kind of the same thing. And yeah, our bikes go a little bit faster, but you're not seeing a whole lot of cheap tires on these bikes in particular. Sometimes if you do like a Kickstarter thing, or maybe a local like US based company that's getting started and not selling in Europe, their tires might not be quite as good. Right. A little bit cheaper, and that's part of the reason some of these like direct mail order bikes and stuff, it's like they're just using off the shelf parts for a regular bicycle. And part of what you're paying for, people constantly ask in the comments like, gosh, why is it so expensive? Some of these electric bikes are $5,000. It's like, well, all the different components and testing and regulations that went into these are more like vehicles, especially back to this one over here, the Delight. It's got full suspension, integrated lights, a rack, nice tires with reflective sidewalls. It's got the reinforcement eyelets and ergonomic grips and internally geared. Actually, that's a continuously variable transmission with a belt drive. I mean, that's like a car replacement. And there's another one on the wall, right? Though it's more expensive, but those don't get flats quite as easily or as frequently.
Yeah, that's right. And one of the things, so you start with the tire. That's one way that you can really address some of the concerns about flats. Yeah. And the tires are generally improving. Like one of the more common tires used on e-bikes was Big Ben. Yeah. Now you have the Big Ben Plus. Oh yeah. Which the Plus just means it has that additional puncture protection. Oh. So that's from Schwabe. Continental also does many e-bike tires that have that extra puncture protection. And
I've heard about the Kevlar guard, K-guard or something like that. Is that Continental, or who does that one?
I believe that's generally with Kenda tires.
Oh yeah, Kenda.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Which Kenda is one of the largest tire manufacturers in the world. And they often make tires for different companies, but certain companies make their own tires. One of them is Schwabe, and we do a lot of their stuff. for example, we also do their tubes. And one of the interesting things about their tubes is they use a higher quality rubber. And because they use a higher quality rubber and more consistent in the thickness of the rubber, they're able to cover a lot of sizes with one tube. So if you see this, for example, 29, 28, 27.5, so you can go anywhere from a 27.5 by 2 inch to a 28 by 2.4. So you have this wide range where, in contrast, something like this is a standard tube from a distributor, QBP, Quality Bicycle Products, which a lot of bike shops use. So this is 700C, 40 by 45 millimeters, but this is probably 1/5 of the sizes that this tube would cover because of the quality. And you know, so that's something to consider, and it's just, there's a lot of variables involved with tires and tubes. But one of the things that's coming up a lot more often these days is tubeless, right? I think that, you know, you and I have been discussing this, and you might have done a video talking about this a little bit as well. But for mountain bikes specifically, most mountain bikes really don't have that much puncture protection in them. As I was saying before, generally for performance tires, they try to make them as lightweight as possible. When you make a bike really lightweight, you don't want to put heavy tires on it and kind of negate all that effort you put in. So that's what a lot of the tires are built for, that. So one way that a lot of riders are, what they're doing to address this is they go tubeless, it's called. So losing the tube is one way that you can save a little bit of weight, and also there's ways, if you're running tubeless, you can actually use a solution to address some of the puncture concerns. So one of the systems is this stands no tubes. So this is a tire sealant. Now, a lot of times when you're reviewing the bikes, you talk about the tires are tubeless ready. And generally what that means is that they have a casing that can handle it, and also that the bead of the tire will work well with the rim. So generally the bead's a little bit thicker and it can mate up to the rim. So the
bead, so if this is the tire, actually we kind of have the little example here. So the round part, that's the tire. Actually, will you hold this up, Chris, and kind of pull one up?
Sure.
So that's the bead right there, right? Like this edge that kind of connects to the rim. If the rim was right here, the bead is what sits in there.
Right. And one point on that too, so this is a wire bead. You also have what's called a folding bead, which it doesn't have a metal wire through it, and it makes it easier to kind of fold it up, and you can put it in a bag or something like that.
I see that for mountain bikes a lot, folding. So it's like you can bundle it up and stick it in a little bag on your bike.
That's right. Yep.
Okay.
And yeah, so to give you an idea, a little bit better idea on a tubeless tire. So this is actually set up from the factory to be tubeless. So this is a mountain bike tire, mountain bike rim, and the rim is specifically made to be able to run tubeless. So this is one of the 3 more common valves that are used in bikes, or one of the 2 more common ones used in the US. So this is a Presta valve, and basically in order to add pressure or remove pressure, there's this kind of locking core here. So if you loosen this up, and then you can just basically push this in. This is how you would kind of remove the air from the tire. But you need to do the same thing if you wanted to add air to the tire. This allows the air to push in. So if it pushes hard enough, it'll allow it to penetrate that.
Okay.
And so if I remove the air from this tire, you can see that it's
starting to get a flat down here. There we go.
Okay. So one thing, it's a little easier to remove the tire if you have most of the pressure out. One of the things about this is already set up without a tube, so it's tubeless. And if you see inside here, this is a liner. The liner is one of the most important parts about going tubeless, because some standard liners won't really create a solid seal, but with this liner, it It's a special material that really prevents any of the air from getting out through where the spokes are.
Like it
yeah, so basically I wanted to show you here. This is actually, instead of having a tube in here, what you see is this is just the valve kind of empties out into the tire, and that's what allows, just similar to a car, you have the valve that just goes right into the rim and tire structure.
What's the difference? I mean, you mentioned Presta. Schrader is the other really common one in the United States, and it's not as common around here, but there's also Dunlop, which seems to be like a European one. So why Schrader versus Presta?
So Presta is generally a little bit better for high pressure. Schrader is a little bit simpler, more common.
Is this it?
Yeah, this is a Schrader.
Schrader
and
valve.
This is more than likely a Schwabe tube as well. And you generally can tell with these like metal valve stems.
So nothing unscrews. It just has a little tiny. This is what you have on your car, or probably the bike you grew up with if you're, in your 30s like me. Are we good on that? Because I wanted to talk about plus size a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, back to wheels. The wheel fits onto the bike by being spoked to a hub. And the hub, they come in different widths. And oftentimes the front hub's like 100 millimeters. The back hub is 135. A little bit wider because you've got the cassette and potentially like a disc brake. Now what we're looking at here is actually even wider than that. This is a 110. It's called boost. So instead of 100, it's 110, and it gives you a wider bracing angle on those spokes, so a little bit more strength, often accompanied by like a through axle instead of a skewer. So a through axle is a little bit thicker, a little bit sturdier and stiffer for mountain biking. And then in the back, this is 148, so it's even bigger, so you can fit like 11 sprockets and a wider cassette. And part of it is also so that you have a wider dropout area, or like this rear swing arm, and up here on the fork, if you have that extra width, you can put even larger tires on. So these are the 27.5 by 2.8. So if you have a tire width of, I think it's 2.6, 2.8, or 3.0, that's considered plus size.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, and to run plus size, I think you need to have boost.
Yeah, I don't think you need to have boost, but it's generally recommended. It's more commonly found on mountain bikes, and it's a good.
Okay.
Good preference.
Well, maybe I'm a little bit off there, but I'm constantly seeing boost and plus size.
Like this fork, for example, is not a boost fork. So this is 100 millimeter, and if you look, this is a 2.4 inch tire. It'd be tight. I mean, basically, you have more room with the boost, and so this, you can go a little bit wider. But
this is an area where maybe you can chime in and help, because I'm kind of basing this off of what I've just seen around at different shops and stuff, or in reviews. But I think you're probably right. This one has fenders and stuff. You probably could fit. I mean, 2.4 is not quite plus size.
That's right.
Right. So if we jumped up to 2.6, it would start to get a little tighter. These fenders might not quite fit, especially if they're knobby tires. So I think that's why I frequently see boost associated with plus.
That's right, and it's becoming the new standard, yeah, so it would be recommended, without a doubt.
And back to, remember we talked about lightweight and stuff, so there's a wider hub spacing, there's more tire, there's probably a wider rim, all that adds weight, and that's part of the reason maybe we're seeing it more frequently on electric bikes, is because you've got that motor, you've got some assistance to help you out.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that this idea that fat tires was becoming a big trend and everything like that, and now more commonly we're seeing plus size, and I think it kind of borrows from both ends of the spectrum. So you had the standard mountain bike tire, which is usually 2 1/4 or something like that, and now you had the fat tires, which are 4 inches, 5 inches, that sort of thing.
Do you still have the fat bikes in the back that they were assembling? If they're still around, just to show people in case they can take a quick peek.
Sure. Yeah, so this is...
There it is. I think this is 4.5.
4.9 actually.
4.9,
yeah.
so almost 5. Wow. And see how wide that is. So fat tires are neat because they allow you to float over sand or snow, and they spread out your weight a little bit. And these are 26-inch rims, so they're usually no bigger than 26 because that tire is so tall and wide. Very cool. I'm glad you had this in here. It's kind of neat to show just the whole progression and talk about how they started pretty narrow and then they went to fat for fun. And now it's kind of like something in between. You get all these different experiences based on your tires. Do you have any closing thoughts, Chris?
No. I mean, yeah, I just think that tires are really important, and if you do have maybe a cheaper bike or something like that, and you're thinking about what you might want to upgrade, I'd say tires and brakes are definitely two things that could be good ways to go. And it's not just about comfort. It's often about safety as well. You know, a little bit better grip and that sort of thing.
That's a good point. And with brakes, there's like linear pull that just kind of have the rubber pads that grab onto your rim, and then there's mechanical disc brake and then hydraulic disc brake. A lot of times hydraulic disc brakes have adjustable levers, and they just give you more control, precision maybe in braking, and you don't have to squeeze quite as hard. You're not getting the drag of the cable or stretch over time. So sometimes you see someone who got a bike and they've never had it tuned up and the brakes come all the way back in. The levers, you can even pinch your own fingers like pulling in. It's another talk for another time, but neat to see all these tires. Thank you so much for spending some time. We got here early so that the store would be quiet and we could go on an adventure, and I really appreciate it, Chris.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, you guys will have more guides and, of course, reviews and stuff back at the site, ElectricBikeReview.com. Have fun out there, post your questions, and ride safe.